rather than intellectual. That's mostly going to this video is mostly going to touch upon something from MBTI, since this is the INTP stream. I'm wondering if other people that operate on the TI-NE axis, I guess I'm wondering if others share a similar need for ambiguity when it comes to thinking about different topics. I think there may be something about extroverted intuition or any kind of abstract or creative function that may have a need when thinking about the world or different issues, may have a need for some level of ambiguity or complexity or indeterminacy in things. And maybe the title of the video really should be something like The Hunger for Indeterminacy rather than ambiguity. I'm not sure if this is something that's peculiar to INTPs. I don't know if it would exist so much among any of the other NT types, except of course, as I mentioned, this sort of constellates around the TI-NE, the pairing of those two functions. I think ENTPs would empathize with this very strongly, and I think ENFPs definitely would as well, and INFPs. Any type with a preponderance of extroverted intuition. I think there's something about indeterminacy, complexity, and ambiguity that greatly excites extroverted intuition specifically, mostly because it's a creativity function, and I don't think that this need for indeterminacy and ambiguity in things necessarily exists so much among types with more of a preponderance of extroverted thinking, which seems to be too results-oriented to desire some level of ambiguity or indeterminacy when considering some topic or thinking about something abstract. For instance, when it comes to personality theory, I tend to stick toward MBTI because it's a system, and I like psychology in general for this exact reason. I like psychology because it has not yet been reduced to a total or complete science. There's still a great deal of ambiguity and room for discovery and exploration in the field. And I think it's just a part of an exploratory function like extroverted intuition, where there's the need for some level of maybe not indeterminacy. I think introverted thinking does like to be able to arrive at clear and incontestable logical judgments about things, and I certainly also have that impulse, but my extroverted intuition being paired in the secondary position, if I've typed myself correctly, I do think if I've defined each function correctly, I've typed myself correctly. I just think extroverted intuition as a creativity function has a desire for some level of ambiguity in their intellectual endeavors or meanderings. And when things become too factual or perhaps maybe even too detail-oriented or too mundane, we tend to lose interest. And if there's not enough ambiguity there or room for exploration and discovery, we can definitely just completely lose interest in those types of things. And I think because a part of extroverted intuition is novelty seeking, and I think it's a novelty function, could be called a novelty function or a creativity function, and any intuition function could be called the same. But there's something about extroverted intuition that really desires to explore the ambiguities and maybe even some of the maybe some of the indeterminacies and things. And although when you have the NTP who is backed up by TI or leads with TI, needs to arrive at clear and certain and mostly inarguable logical judgments about things, extroverted intuition is there to allow us to unite seemingly unreconcilable ideas, or reconcile paradoxes in creative ways, or identify them and then resolve them in creative. It's a very difficult type to manage, I think, because TI tends to scrutinize and NE wants to explore. And so to have the impulse to explore and to want to connect seemingly disparate areas or ideas, or wanting to reconcile contradictory ideas, or wanting to find more creative and original ways of viewing things that deviate from the traditional perspectives. I think that's the proper way of defining an extroverted intuition. It's very difficult for a type, maybe for NTPs, to settle upon a specific thing to specialize in, maybe, because once we've thought about something enough, we get bored with it, and once we've modeled, once we've figured it out, it's still interesting because we had to figure it out and it required some effort. But once it's totally reduced to a singular explanation, if anything ends up being that simple, we can lose interest in it because we've already figured it out and we want to move on to, since extroverted intuition is novelty seeking, we want to move on to something new that excites the same part of us. So it's definitely a difficult type to be, to have both the impulse to explore, which is a part of extroverted intuition, and the need to engage in evaluate logical consistency evaluation. It's difficult to balance those two impulses, and then for them not to totally either distract the individual who's attempting to manage all of the eccentricities of their type. So yeah, maybe other NTPs could relate to the need for ambiguity in when they're thinking about certain things. Maybe that's why NE is associated with thinking about maybe future hypotheticals, or entertaining hypotheticals, or engaging in imaginative wanderings or speculations or whatever, because there's novelty and ambiguity in those things, and that's what extroverted intuition seeks. It's the discovery function. Yeah. But once things have been reduced to a singular explanation, and once they've been made concrete with enough analogies and with enough thinking, they can become less interesting. It doesn't happen immediately. I mean, I don't really have the tendency to flit between different subjects or not be able to find a specific path. But I find that NE is more capable of dealing. It's more of a theoretical function, and it's less. It finds the straightforward mundane, and so it's very difficult for a person with a lot of extroverted intuition to orient themselves along a single practical path, because the need for novelty is so high with extroverted intuition. And once we've settled on an answer, the question becomes boring. It's sometimes very exciting to just be able to raise the question and not necessarily reduce all of the fun of ideation to a single answer. It feels very, very constraining, but the home or the domain of extroverted intuition is to just constantly be reperspectivizing things and to be developing new ways of looking, lenses to look at things that have been to either improve upon, in the case of the NTP, the traditional model, or at least to flip the traditional model on its head and to look at things at all angles, or in another way. So but simple questions that only render simple answers and end up seeming very mundane, I think, um, and there's a lot of joy in the experience of being able to uh, not settle upon a single answer and to think about the question um, through different lenses endlessly. Um, so maybe there's something about extroverted intuition that needs that ambiguity in things. And maybe TI also needs the complexity as well. I don't know. I think that quality of NTPs makes the type very good at any type of theory work. Or, I mean, they probably mostly belong in like academia or not necessarily. I mean, TI ends up being very good at any kind of formal logic and conditional logic and any type of logic, really. And I'm not sure if TI is associated with a particular form of logic or if, TE is maybe associated with, let's say, formal or conditional, and then TI is associated with like modal uh, or maybe TE is more causal logic and then TI is more conditional or formal logic. I'm not exactly sure. Defining the functions with reference to a specific way in which they manifest and reducing that to the functions manifest in different ways. They're associated with a bunch of different cognitive processes and forms of reasoning and ways of thinking. So as much as I love to be able to reduce something to a single word, it just happens to be difficult in this case, which seems to contradict the need for ambiguity, wanting to be able to reduce or simplify rather than to complicate. But in any case, maybe that's something other TI users can relate to, or maybe not so much TI. That's more so NE. Maybe other NE users like ENFPs, ENTPs, and INFPs would relate to, as well as other INTPs. So yeah, I think extroverted intuition is like one of the functions that's most like struggles most with the more of it you have, the more an individual is going to struggle with applying themselves to some specific thing and then to specialize on one focused activity or path. And so the question of what career is appropriate for extroverted intuitors is a difficult one to answer because it's an inherently novelty seeking and creative function. And it seems to defy the need to settle and specialize on one thing. Really, its domain is general postulating about things in general rather than just a few specific things. So I'm not sure if other extroverted intuitors would relate to that. But yeah, this conflict between the exploratory nature of NE and the scrutinizing nature of TI. I'm wondering if other NTPs feel that conflict at all. I don't so much. NE doesn't, they don't exactly conflict with each other. Ultimately, I lead from a specific point, and then NE just kind of assists with what I'm thinking about. But I'm sure in some types, those two functions could end up conflicting with each other depending on um, just the person. We have our leading function and our secondary function, but I mean, sometimes depending on our mood in the day, we could be a little bit more of one than the other. So, those two identities existing in one person, that can produce a little bit of creative chaos. And so it's the question of what the extroverted intuitor should apply themselves to specifically is a very difficult one for both them and others to answer for them. So, um, and the world doesn't exactly seem to value, although institutions of higher learning do tend to value more of the extroverted intuition, kind of philosophizing, postulating about things, and kind of the bizarre uh, creativity of the function if it's really strong. Uh, some universities do value that, some majors value that, departments value that in writing or in thought. I'd say the function at most universities and in most educational institutions, at least in the United States, I think if I were to choose, see, we always want to simplify things as much as possible. I would want to what cognitive function is most incentivized by institutions inherently, I think, is FE, because institutions exist to preserve themselves, and institutions preserve themselves even if they don't do so consciously, and status quos strive to preserve themselves, or individuals strive to preserve the status quo, whether or not they're valid. And so at those types of institutions, FE really dominates, I feel, and SE, because FE users are more keenly aware of norms and how they should act and behave, and maybe SE users are more aware of opportunity and are more action oriented. But I don't think NE is particularly well incentivized by most universities, although it is in some fields and some majors, right? I don't like making general statements like that, even though I just did. But yeah, it depends on the major, right? You can't make a general statement about all universities and all majors. I mean, these systems end up being very complex, and so to say that, oh, woe is me, NE isn't valued in the world, I mean, it is. You just have to find where it is valued and what it should be applied to. But since it's an inherently novelty-seeking function, it's difficult to apply it necessarily to a traditional path. So, I mean, yeah, I feel like NE should be more associated with like writers and maybe journalists, but mostly like artists or people in, yeah, mostly with like artists. And if it's not dominant, even in the ENTP, I'd say it's more meant for like creative applications of the function rather than traditional career paths. Whereas TI is pretty much suited to wherever it can figure out how the logic of the institution and the career works, and then it can apply itself and just simply adapt and function there. But I don't know. But yeah, I'm just wondering if any other extroverted intuitors also relate to the inherent need for, or a need for discovery, exploration, and more importantly, for there to be a certain level of ambiguity and indeterminacy in things. Like I feel like extroverted intuition is very good at maybe asking the question, but not necessarily being able to render an answer. I don't know. Just a fun topic. Thanks for watching.